everybody, it's Allison and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today we are going to be talking about the June release for Waffle Flower, which includes new grip mats. So I do have two cards that I'm going to share today, but it's not really about the cards today. It is about the grip mats. There are new sizes and it's like version 2 of these grip mats because there is a new vendor making the mats. Now, before I jump into today's video, I just want to draw your attention to my first video when the mats first came out. I think it was maybe 10 months ago. I did a very involved video. I did a lot of testing with the mats and showed you all different ways to use the mats. And that still applies. So if you haven't watched that video, I really encourage you to do that first and then come back to this one to learn what's new about the new version. One thing that I want to clarify is that I don't work for Waffle Flower. So if you have any specific questions regarding these new grip mats, or if you have any issues at all with products, please direct that to Waffle Flower's customer service. That is the more appropriate avenue rather than leaving a comment on this video. Now, while I don't work for Waffle Flower, I think it's obvious that I love the company. I love the products. You see me using them a lot, and I think they're just really innovative. So let's jump in. There are bundles. Now, if you are familiar with Waffle Flower, they very often have products that come in combos or bundles, and they come in a discount. So there are several bundles for the new mats. Now, I do want to start off today's video where I left off in the last video, and that is, how do I store my grip mats? Now here is the pouch that I showed you in the last video, and I had told you that I was going to store my grip mats in one of these pouches. This happens to be from Simon Says Stamp. And I do have the new grip mats in this bag, but I am not storing them in here. This is how I store new products. So these are all new. I put them in the pouch. That way I don't lose them. Although if my friend is watching, she's probably laughing because I lose anything, even if they're in a pouch. But theoretically, the pouches are now for new products, and we're going to talk about how I store these. But first, here are the new sizes. These are replacing the 4.25 by 5.5. So now there's a 4x4. And the 7.5 by 11 is replacing the 8.5 by 8.5. Now these two are still the sizes that you put in your Misties. The smaller one goes in the mini Misty, the bigger one goes in the regular Misty. So those are still the same size. And then these two off to the side, the 6x6 and the 5.5 by 8.5, still the same size. Now the 6x6 you probably see me using most often. So I'm going to show you how I store this. These are the Craft Stacks trays from Spellbinders. This is the large size. And the way the trays come, it's a 2-pack. And there's a shallow tray and a deep tray. And when you stack it together, it kind of makes a box. Okay. Now, what I do is I take the two shallow trays, and they actually stack together. And that's where I keep my 6x6 grip mat now. So you see how these two shallow trays actually close. And this is how I keep mine. So let's just open up the package. Again, this is the brand new one. It looks the same as the old one, right? Now, this is the other thing I do. These are the carrier sheets. They still come sandwiched between two carrier sheets, just like before. But in my last video, I told you I store mine with these carrier sheets. I do not do that anymore. So I'm pulling these carrier sheets off and I'm going to set them aside. I'm not going to throw them out, but I do not store them with the grip mats. It's just too much of a hassle to get them off every time. Now here's a big thing that's noticeable in the new ones. They're kind of cloudy looking. And I mean, I think some of those splotches are quite frankly from the carrier sheets, but it is splotchier looking than the originals. That's about really the only difference that I can see in the mats. They still have a bevel like the original ones. You'll see the bevel right here. So, like I said, I don't store them with the carrier sheets. I just put them between two pieces of copy paper. And it just protects it, keeps it from getting dirty. And with this particular size, I store it, like I said, in the craft stacks trays. Now you see how it kind of can stack vertical. Now I'm going to show you where I store this. And so these little pouches have new product in them. And I store it in this, I guess you can call it a file holder. Some people call it a mail holder. I don't know. But it's this big acrylic thing that I get at the Container Store. So these are pretty big. So this is where I store my grip mat now. I store it with my Misties. And you see how it just stacks vertically. And I've started putting my new Spellbinders Guillotine paper trimmer in there as well. So now I have everything that I use on a daily basis. My Misties, my grip mats, my paper trimmer. Not pictured was my little score buddy, which also goes in there. All right, here is the medium size of these craft stacks trays. And you may have seen these in previous videos. In the deep trays, I put my shader brushes and then sandwiched between the shallow ones is my grip mat. And that happens to be the 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. The old one, you can see it was stained with some red ink. That's my old one. They don't make this size anymore. It's now being replaced by the 4 by 4. But here you can see how these stack, and I just keep these in a drawer right next to me. So that one is within easy reach. So here's the 4 by 4, and now I can sandwich that between some copy paper and put it in this little container. All right, so again, I don't store them with the carrier sheets. So let's compare the old to the new. These are the 8 1/2 by the 8 1/2 by 5 1/2 grip mats. And the old one is on the left. You can see it has some stains from some red ink. And while I perform my expert testing here, which you're going to see the expert testing, let's talk about problem solving. So if your mat is too sticky, you can just rub your hand on it or pat your hand all over it. I've never had that problem. I've heard people talking about how their paper stuck to the grip mat and they couldn't get it off and it ripped. I have never had that problem, but if it's too sticky, do what I said, like pat your hand on it to get rid of it. Now, what you just saw me doing there is spritzing it with water, and that's going to bring the stick back. So if your grip mat is not very sticky, or it's just not as sticky as it once was, spray it with water and wipe it with a lint-free cloth. Okay, and again, here's the size that we were just looking at, and I, again, store it in between two sheets of copy paper. All right, here's a difference in how these come packaged. They still come with two guides, and the old guide was larger than the grip mat. So this is the old guide. And you'll see, because there's no grip on the bottom, you couldn't, well, this happens to be my craft mat, but even if this was a glass mat, it wouldn't grip because the guide was bigger than the mat. So they've solved this. The new guides are now smaller than the grip mat. Now, make sure when you place your guide on your mat that you flip it over so it's upside down when you put it on your mat. So, but here you can see how it's smaller than the grip mat itself. And now, again, I don't have a glass mat because I don't use a glass mat in my videos, but if this were a glass mat, it would be staying. And here you can see that I actually did get it to stay. But there's a perimeter on the bottom that is not covered by that guide. So now it will stick. Now the 5.5 by 8.5 is sized to fit the mini stencil mat. You can see that here. And you can actually see the guide because it's white underneath. You rarely see me using the guides because I work on a black craft mat. All right, let's talk about how I use the mats in my everyday crafting. First is the Misty. Now before the grip mat, I used the mouse pad with a magnet. I believe when you buy the Misty, it comes with maybe a little pad of paper and you have to buy this little mouse pad separately. But I'm going to show you a little secret in my craft room. I have several little containers of little pieces of paper, just all of my colored scraps. And yes, I keep really tiny scraps. You know I like die cutting. I mean, even these I'm going to keep because I cut a lot of tiny leaves with Spellbinders dies a lot or other companies' dies, and I don't throw these scraps away. Call me frugal, call me crazy, but I like my scraps. And so I like throwing a scrap into my Misty to stamp on. I'm only going to use the size that I need. But if I had to put a magnet on here and a stamp and I had to restamp it, would it work? I don't know. But what I can tell you is that if I want to use this little scrap of paper with this stamp, there's nowhere to put this magnet, right? So that's where the grip mat comes in handy. So I'm going to take out the new grip mat. This is the new version, but same size as the old one. And here go the carrier sheets. I'm going to put those aside. And here you can see, maybe you saw that it was kind of cloudy looking. But it fits in there just like the old one. And I'm going to show you. Just put the little scrap of paper on there, line up my stamp. And I can stamp this several times. The paper's not going to move. And now I have a sentiment. I don't need to cut it because I've already cut the strip before I stamped. All right, now let's go back to the guide. One benefit of the guide is that it makes it easier to take your grip mat in and out of your Misty. Like you'll see it really grips to the Misty. So I don't know. I'm not going to say it's a hassle getting in and out, but if I wanted to use a cling stamp in my Misty, I do need to take this out. So I did bring in a glass mat this is my travel Tim Holtz mat. Now here's the guide. Remember to turn it upside down before placing it on your mat. Okay, so here it is, and you'll see now I can show you that it actually sticks to your glass surface. And so that was a big improvement, I think, making the guides smaller. I think that was a smart thing for them to do. And now when you put it in your Misty, again, it's going to stick just like it did to the glass mat. Now, I personally don't use the guide in my Misty, and that's because I use the guide that's in the Misty. All the pink lines, I use those to line things up, and I just don't like having the double guides. I think if they're not perfectly lined up, they kind of defeat the purpose. And I just like the clean look of this. So here you can see that I do store my large mist or my regular size Misty with my grip mat in it. Now I should mention that Waffle flower, I believe they recommend that you keep the guides on the back of your grip mat when they're in your Misty, because when you're taking them in and out, it will reduce any stretching. You know, I can only tell you what I do. I haven't had any problems with stretching, but I also don't take it in and out very often. So I just wanted to mention that. Let's take a look at the new sizes. So the 7.5 by 11 is replacing the 8.5 by 8.5. And by the way, there are really good instructions and tips on the back of the packaging. So again, before you contact customer service, look at the back and see if that will help. Now, okay, my mat does grip to my craft mat, even though it's not glass. Now, I have quite a few large stencils in my stash. And that's where this size comes in handy. Now, for today, I'm going to be using the Layered Sunflowers stencil set from Simon Says Stamp. And this is a half sheet of cardstock, so it's 5.5 by 8.5. And it fits nicely on this mat. And here's my new little 4x4 grip mat that I'm going to put on the side. These stencils are 6 by 9, so they're just slightly bigger than my paper. Now it will grip. There's just a slight amount around each edge that's going to grip to the mat. I would suggest probably having a little bit more room around your paper than this, but it did work. Now you may have seen me do this before, but I'm going to use this small grip mat to hold my ink. Now the great thing about this is that you can use any ink pad. It doesn't matter if it's square, rectangular, circular, or even mini. So you don't have to have a special holder for each type of ink that you have. All right, now this stencil, because it's so big, it has a lot of surface area, and there are some areas where it's not sitting flush against the paper. Now you could use pixie spray on something like this. There's some delicate areas of this stencil, but I'm coming in with my shader brush. I think this is the 3+, and where there are areas that I'm concerned about where ink might get under the stencil, I'm just going to use my finger and I'm just going to press down on the stencil right around where the opening is, and that will get the stencil opening flush against the paper. So I know the angle that I'm working at is kind of hard to see, but down here, I don't need to worry as much, and I can be hands-free. And again, the grip mat is gripping the paper and the stencil so that I can be hands-free. All right, so that was stencil 1, and I'm going to take off my paper and show you. Now these are oxides, which are water reactive, so this ink will come off really easily with a spritz of water. Now I'm coming in, this is still the same stencil, so again, this video isn't really about stenciling, but the second and third stencils are much easier. This happens to be the third stencil, so it's just all one color. I could be hands-free for all of that. And now I have a whole panel that is stenciled, and it's going to make 2 cards. So I only had to stencil it one time, but you know, this is a 2-for-1. So all I have to do is cut this panel in half and make my 2 cards. Now I did do that off camera, and I actually have a blog post that I posted last week with these 2 cards. So if you're interested in the details, I will have a link to that blog post. But you can see how different I got these cards to look with just the addition of some white gel pen. Let's jump into the new release, the actual products. Now, these are just two of the products from the release, and this is an addition to their popular postage collection. And this is also new. This is the Daisy background stencil. And I have an A2 size piece of cardstock, and you can see how the opening in the stencil is for an A2 panel. Now I'm going to be using these bright and gorgeous inks from Pink Fresh Studio, and I can guarantee you that at least one of these will stain the mat. So I'm going to pull out the Stencil Extender. They released this with the original grip mats last year, and I'm going to show you why this comes in handy. So if I were to put this down, now the stencil, there's a perimeter around the paper so it will grip to the grip mat. But if I started ink blending and got careless with that, especially that hot pink ink, it would get on the grip mat. Now, I say in my first video over and over, it doesn't matter if you stain your mat. It's okay. It doesn't affect the functionality of it. But if it bothers you, then use this extender. So the stencils fit right into the notches on the back of this extender. And then, the paper fits right into the opening of the stencil. It's really just, these are just so clever the way they design them. Now I'm using my new 7.5 by 11 grip mat, and now I have room on the side for my ink. So it's kind of like a little palette that I'm working on. Now I'm going to breeze through the stenciling because, I'm trying not to make this video longer than it needs to be. Now, on my first stencil, you saw me using Waffle flower blending brushes, and that's because those are dedicated to my oxides. And so now I'm using dye ink, so I'm using my large Simon brushes. And you can see that the stencil extender is keeping me from getting ink all over the mat. And look at these gorgeous colors. Ugh, I love them. All right, so I'm going to pull off the stencil. I'm going to set those aside and I'll clean those. By the way, a really great way to clean stencils that are stained is by using rubbing alcohol. So here you can see that the mat is nice and clean. That stencil extender really worked. All right, let's do another panel. These are the pint-sized paper pouncers from Picket Fence Studios, and these are great for really delicate stencils, but they're also great for just getting a lot of color. And I want this panel to be really saturated. So see how saturated that already is? So I'm just going to pounce these colors in. Now, these are not for blending, so I wouldn't blend it back and forth, but that's why they're called pouncing. But look how much color you can get. If I just use blending brushes to get this much color, it would take me a lot longer. Now, obviously, I'd sped that up, but I did come in with my blending brushes at the end to blend it. And here you can see the difference between those two panels. All right, here is the mini stencil mat. You see me using this all the time if you watch my videos, but now it's called the 6x9 Media Mat. They have renamed it. Now, I will probably still call it the stencil mat, the mini stencil mat, because here's the thing. I used to work in the Sears Tower in Chicago, and they renamed it. Now, I can't tell you what they renamed it because I still call it the Sears Tower. And I will always call it the Sears Tower. And I will probably always call this the mini stencil mat. But I think they renamed it because I think it's been a little confusing ever since they released the grip mats that people use for stenciling. So you'll have to forgive me if I, continue to call it the mini stencil mat. All right. I want to cut down the contrast on this card because I know that I want a white heat emboss on it. and there's just a lot of contrast with the white stencil design. So I'm taking some lighter inks and I'm just going to go very lightly over this panel. So where there's hot pink ink, I'm going to take this pink, the light pink ink, and go over it. And you can see how it, like comparing it to the bottom, you can see how it really knocked down the contrast level. And I'm using some lighter orange ink. I think that's dried marigold, distress ink. And so I'll just go over the entire panel until I'm happy and all the white is basically gone. So here we are finished, and now you see the difference between the two panels. They're both gorgeous, but different, right? All right, so here's that panel, and I told you I'd wanted a white heat emboss, and so here's that new stamp set. And so I am thinking of pulling this sentiment from me to you onto the bottom. And I'm thinking of stamping it there, but I'm not sure, and I don't want to mess up my panel. So here's where those carrier sheets come in handy. Now remember I told you don't throw the carrier sheets out. This is probably from the 4x4 size. I'm going to cover my card panel and I'm going to stamp. So it's stamping onto that carrier sheet, but it's because it's see-through, I can basically see what my design would look like. And it's just a really great way to test things out and not ruin a perfectly good panel. So I'm happy with how it looks. So I can go ahead and take the carrier sheet out and stamp it onto the actual panel. Another great use for the carrier sheets is for masking. Instead of tape, use the carrier sheets, especially because they cling so well to the grip mats. All right, and here you can see how the ink came off really easily. So here is this final card. I think it's really cute, and I think this oversized postage set is a really fun addition to their ever-growing postage collection. By the way, I will have details for these two cards on my blog, and there'll be a link in the description below to the blog post. There will also be a list of supplies in the description below, so check those out. And again, I will have a link to that original grip mat video below, as well as at the end of the video. Now here's the second card, and look at how happy this card is. I just had to put the smile sentiment on there because how can you not smile looking at this card? I think this stencil, it seems like such a basic stencil, but just look at the results you can get with it. And I mean, so many different color combinations. I don't know. I love it. All right, I feel like I've been rambling through most of this video, so let's get to the heart of the matter, what I should have been saying all along. And that is the new grip mats. They're made by a new vendor. They are still made from the same material. It's the material that clear stamps are made from. The only real difference that I saw between the old and new mats was what I had already mentioned, which the new ones are kind of cloudy looking, but I haven't noticed any difference in functionality. Now, of course, I've been using the old mats for 10 months now, and I've only been using these new mats for about a week. But I don't anticipate there being any difference over time. But again, I do not work for Waffle Flower, so if you have any specific questions about these new mats, please direct them to Waffle Flower's customer service. And the other purpose of this video was to give you an update on how I use my mats in my everyday crafting. And I can honestly say that these mats have been game changers for me. They have truly changed the way that I craft. They have made crafting a lot easier for me, especially, the two areas that I showed you today, and that is stamping in my Misties and stenciling. If you took my grip mats out of my Misties, I would probably cry. They just make it so much easier and so much faster. And then stenciling, same thing, like not having to use tape or any of that nonsense. It's just really made life easier. So you might be asking yourself, do I need these new grip mats if I already have the originals? Well, no, you don't. With any tool, there will probably be wear and tear over time. So maybe at some point you will be ready for new grip mats. But if yours are working fine still, just like mine, then you don't need the new ones. If you don't have the grip mats yet, and you're curious, try a size. If you have a Misty, try a size that fits the Misty. They're not terribly expensive products. So if you've been curious, I encourage you to try one. But I'm not here to talk you into anything. I am merely here to share my experience and hope that it helps you in some way. This video is now one of my longer videos, so I am going to leave you with that. I really appreciate you being here. As always, I appreciate it. So if you liked this video, please give me a thumbs up. And while you're at it, hit that subscribe button. I will see you next time. Take care. Bye-bye.